Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a quick conversation, just kind of walk through of what made me go with a Super C over Super C style RV for what we use our application for versus, one of my neighbors over here that has a Class A American coach over here. So um, as we get into it, this is a common debate on which one should you get, right? Both have their pros and cons. In the Class A, you're going to get way more storage, way more storage. Most of these bays over here on this coach will probably pass all the way through, where you could see on the Super C, you run it. I mean, you have a lot of storage underneath here, but this bay I've picked as a holding tank. But when you get into one of these, you can see we have the some extra power cords. We have our Stinky Slinky, and obviously it doesn't go all the way across because you're in contention with the rails of the truck frame. I'm sorry. So the biggest thing for us as why we chose something like this is mainly the towing capacity. We have a 3-car stacker trailer that we pull, and definitely can get into the tail wagging the dog on something like that. So on these Super Cs, you will have your 30,000 or 40,000 pound towing capacity, depending on what you get, what you're configured with, or whether it's a pintle or a ball style or what it would be. This specific one is a 30,000 pound hookup, where you can see as we get into the Class A's, this guy has 2 different hitches on here. I'd imagine max capacity on one of these Class A's. Most of them, unless you get up into the bigger Newells, are either 15 or 20,000 pounds. The Newell coaches will get up into the 25,000 pound rating. Another thing is you kind of walk around to the front. Some people say fuel economy. Some people say it's kind of a wash with the aero differences. Obviously you have your truck front end, which a lot of people will say serviceability, right? So serviceability on one of these things, you take it to pretty much any Freightliner store, any Cummins dealer, they'll work on these a lot quicker than they'll work on one of those Class A's over there. You can get into the engine bays a lot easier. Downsides, there are a few. One of them I would say on the Super C is turning radius. Turning radius is horrible compared to one of these Class A's, where you have the much wider steer angle, and a lot of these will have a passive or even an active steer tag axle on the rear. The rear active tag axle definitely gives you a lot tighter turning radius. Most of these ones that even have passive axles will be a lot better going forwards. Active ones like on the Newell coaches will be much better in reverse as well, where you can't steer these quite as tight because you're in contention with the engine compartment on these, where the engine on these diesel pushers is obviously in the rear, hence pusher. Another thing people don't like to talk about is safety, right? I know it's a big thing, when you're rolling down the road, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80,000 pounds, depending on what you're pulling. On these Class A's, you're first on scene at the accident. Your driver compartment's right there. Where these, there's a big 15-liter motor to get in front of you. The chances of a fender bender and not busting out the windshield can be a lot higher. Or something like this, if someone pulls out in front of you, you're more or less tearing up the front end of that coach pretty easily. So that's a big one. Headlights, it's really subjected to the manufacturer. Lighting components on these can sometimes be a lot easier to find. Where a lot of these Class A's, they'll just kind of repurpose old truck headlights, like some of the old Newmars would use old Chevy lights, Dodge lights, something like that. Pretty turnkey application. You get those on really any sort of any eBay site, anything like that. Another thing that most people won't tell you when buying a Super C over a Class A is the ride quality. So the ride quality in one of these is definitely not going to be as good as most of your higher end Class A motorhomes. A lot of that has to do with even just the air ride front axle on most of these Class A's. Well, you can get some of the higher end Super C's. A lot of stuff on the Pete chassis will have an air ride front axle. This coach does just have relief springs, which while they are really nice with the 18,000 pound front end on something like this, you definitely don't get the nice cushy ride of the air. With that being said, you also don't get the problems of a front air ride suspension. You do have dual airbags in the rear. However, with that added towing capacity, you will get something that is typically a lot bouncier than something like this. Also, you don't have the big motor hanging off the back, which on the Super C, which will give you quite a bit better ride quality on the Class A's, because you're hanging a couple thousand pounds off the rear of that coach. Where this one, when you're towing it without the trailer, it definitely lets you know if your fillings are all intact for sure running down the highway, especially we go through places like Louisiana, up into West Virginia, Ohio, something like that. It definitely lets you know that there are bumps in the road. Big features that I would look for if I were shopping for one again, sometimes in these Class C's or even the bigger Class A's, you're not going to get auto leveling on some of these bigger coaches. A lot of that is because these things are so heavy now, especially when you hook up a trailer on the back. I had an issue when I got to the track one time. We put the jacks down here on the back of this coach and ended up driving down into the blacktop a little bit. Where a lot of these bigger Class A's with the four-corner air ride will sometimes opt for, on some of the higher end coaches, they will have the suspension level out the coach versus having the jacks level out the coach. That's a little bit easier. You can go a lot lower. One of the downsides to this coach right here is this is your static ride height on the front. So if you are in a position where you're downhill a little bit and the coach is lower in the front end than it is in the rear, or vice versa, or higher in the front end than it is in the rear, sometimes you can run out of travel. You'll get those steps way off the ground because we can't drop this front axle any lower to be able to accommodate the ride height that it's currently at. Where you can see over here, as you get to this Class A, you will see that how low that is, and then if you're just leveling the coach out, you don't have to run into jacking it way up in the air to achieve like a static ride height or a level playing field, as it were. Overall reliability, I think that goes just kind of person to person. I mean, when you're working with something like this on a Renegade, and you're also working, something like that over there on an American coach style chassis, you will oftentimes, get similar problems. A lot of these components across the industry are relatively the same. So, while, this is also built, RV box on top of a ladder frame chassis. This is just a Freightliner chassis, where the American coaches, a lot of your other production motorhomes, are also built the same. You just have a box on top of a ladder frame chassis, whether it's Spartan or Freightliner or something like that. A lot of your stuff can remain the same. A lot of folks will say if you're putting miles down, these Freightliners can be a little bit better because they're made on truck chassis. They're not made on, motorhome chassis. They have better components, so on and so forth. They can handle the weight and the bumps a little bit better. But as far as internal components of the RV, a lot of it's going to remain the same. I would say more or less it just depends on what you're towing. The biggest thing here is, on this, these are both, 40, 45 foot coaches. The biggest thing is, on this Renegade, you have a 33, 34 foot box, where on the Class A's, you have the full length of the motorhome, whether it's 40 or 45 feet, from windshield to tail cap, you pretty much have that whole length of interior space. Where on something like this, you get in 33 feet unless you opt for something that has like a bunk over the cab, right? Our previous motorhome did have a bunk over the cab. That was just a sport deck toter home, which led us to something like this. That is definitely something I miss, because as you go inside, you don't get the bunk over the cab. So you have to make up the couch every night and something like that. This is the bunk model coach, but it has a bunk delete for a larger closet. So you can sometimes sleep more people in the Super Cs, because they're made a lot of times for folks that are going to the racetrack and stuff like that. But it all just depends on layouts. One upside of not having that bunk over the cab is significantly quieter going down the road. Our previous coach that did have the bunk over the cab, it shoots air straight down into that upper door jamb. Makes it sound like there's a tornado on the side of your head as you're running down the road kind of above 70 miles an hour. So that's something, again, that nobody really talks about. Really kind of one of the things that you just have to experience and learn and to live with. Overall, I would say the Super C kind of fits what I use the coach for quite a bit more than a Class A would, unless you got into something like the Newell coach or something like that. They can handle that 25,000 pounds to tow, the big 3-car stacker that I have. I've had some great luck with these coaches. Really, all in all, no issues to really speak of. Other than a few things, just like here and there, we had to get, window shades and stuff like that. Same things will break on your Class A's. So all in all, super happy with the choice, with the purchase. In the end, would a Class A be cool once we got to the track? Yes. Could you not pull the trailer as well when going to the track? Also, yes. So it just depends on what you're using it, what you're looking for. I did drive this coach pretty much nonstop from San Diego to Charlotte in one haul. It was roughly 38 hours. Stopped for an hour at one of the truck stops somewhere in Louisiana. Texas is a huge state. Holy crap! I watched the sun go down and sun come up, and was still in Texas, going along I-10 and I-20. But they're great to put some miles down on. It's really cool to get one if you haven't gotten one. If you're curious and you have some questions, feel free to reach out, drop a comment. Look forward to hearing from y'all soon.